On Christmas morning, my son called from Seattle and said, "Dad, is the $10,000 Victoria deposits for you each month covering everything? Your Parkinson's medication? The specialist visits, do you need more?" I set down my coffee cup very carefully on the kitchen counter and said, "Son, what account are you talking about? The only money coming into this house is my pension and what the food bank helps me with." There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Dad, I've been sending that money for 5 years. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a chief auditor for a regional insurance group in Portland, Oregon, reviewing financial statements, catching discrepancies, tracing money through layers of accounts that other people assumed were invisible. I retired in 2019 with a firm handshake, a plaque, and a pension that covers my mortgage payment and not much else. My hands shake now from the Parkinson's, which arrived uninvited 3 years ago and has been making itself at home ever since. But my mind still works exactly the way it always did. I notice when numbers don't add up. I notice when stories don't hold together. And I notice when something is very, very wrong. My son Daniel is 43 years old. He founded a logistics software company in Seattle when he was 35, built it carefully over 8 years, and last year the company was valued at just over $3 million. He is not flashy about it. He drives a used Subaru. He calls me every Sunday. He is, without qualification, the best thing I ever had a hand in making. His mother, my wife Carol, passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. In her final weeks, she made me promise to stay close to Daniel, to not let grief pull us apart the way it pulls some families apart. I have kept that promise. We talk every week, or I thought we did. Victoria came into Daniel's life 4 years ago. She was 36 then, a former financial advisor at a wealth management firm in Bellevue. She was sharp, polished, and she had a way of steering conversations that I recognized immediately from decades of watching people manage narratives in boardrooms. Daniel was in love. I kept my reservations quiet, because Carol had also made me promise not to be the difficult father-in-law who poisons his son's marriage with suspicion. So I shook Victoria's hand warmly at their wedding 2 years ago. I sat in the front row. I gave a toast that made people cry. 6 months after the wedding, Victoria suggested that she manage the financial support Daniel wanted to send me. "You're busy, Daniel," she said at dinner one evening, her voice smooth and practical. "I handle finances professionally. Let me set up a structure that's tax efficient. A medical support account in your father's name. I'll manage the disbursements." Daniel thought this was considerate. He told me about it on the phone, proud of his wife's initiative. "Victoria's setting up an account for you, Dad. 10,000 a month. I want you to have proper care." I thanked him. I waited for paperwork that never came. I waited for deposits that never arrived. When nothing appeared in my account after the first month, I assumed there had been a setup delay. After the second month, I called Daniel. He was traveling for a conference. Victoria answered his phone. "Oh, Robert," she said, her voice carrying the particular warmth she deployed when she wanted to seem helpful. "The account takes time to establish properly for tax purposes. These things move slowly when they're structured correctly. We want to make sure you get maximum benefit." I accepted that explanation. I am ashamed now that I did, but I was 66 years old and newly diagnosed with Parkinson's and frightened, and she sounded so certain. By the 6th month, I had stopped asking. Victoria had a way of making questions feel like accusations, of making the person asking feel confused and unreasonable. "Robert, we've been over this. The structure protects you. Would you rather we do this improperly and you lose half to taxes?" So I stopped asking. I told myself Daniel knew that it was being handled, that the money was building somewhere for when I truly needed it. I went to the food bank on Thursdays. I applied for prescription assistance programs for the Parkinson's medication. I did not tell Daniel any of this, because I did not want him to worry, and because I trusted that the financial support was in place, just structured in a way I didn't fully understand. That was my mistake, one I spent 5 years making. Daniel arrived on December 23rd with a rental car and a suitcase, and the particular expression of a man who has been traveling since 4 in the morning. I had spent 2 days preparing. I made the lamb roast Carol used to make for Christmas, following her handwritten recipe card that I keep in the kitchen drawer. I set the table with the good dishes. My hands shook badly while I ironed the tablecloth, and I had to stop twice and breathe, but I got it done. Victoria came in behind him, wearing a cashmere coat that I later learned cost more than my monthly pension payment. She looked around my living room the way someone looks around a room they are already planning to change. "Robert," she said, leaning in for the half embrace she always performed, "you really should let Daniel hire someone to help you with the house. It's a lot to manage alone." She set her bag on the entry table, a structured leather thing with gold hardware. "The yard especially. Have you thought about a smaller place? Something more manageable at your age?" "I am 68, not 88. I told her the house suited me fine. She smiled pleasantly and said nothing, which was her way of disagreeing without conceding the argument. At dinner, Daniel asked how my recent neurology appointment had gone. I told him the medication was working adequately, that my tremors were stable, that the specialist was cautiously optimistic. Victoria was scrolling through her phone beneath the table, which she did not think I could see, but I could. Then Daniel set down his fork and said, "Dad, I want to make sure the monthly support is enough. With the new Parkinson's treatment protocols, costs can escalate." "Victoria, has the account been keeping pace with his actual expenses?" Victoria looked up from her phone. Something moved across her face very fast, a tightening around the eyes, and then it was gone, replaced by the pleasant, competent expression she wore like a uniform. "The account is structured for long-term stability, Daniel. It grows in value between disbursements. Robert, you're not having trouble covering things, are you?" She looked at me directly when she said it. I saw the instruction buried inside the question. She was telling me, in the language people use when they want to control a situation without appearing to, that the correct answer was no. I looked at my son. I looked at the lamb roast Carol's recipe had produced. I looked at my own hands, slightly trembling around my water glass. 31 years of catching financial discrepancies had taught me that the moment you allow an incorrect narrative to stand unchallenged is the moment the fraud becomes permanent. "Son," I said, "I have not received a single deposit. Not in 5 years." Daniel's fork stopped moving. "That's not possible. I've sent $10,000 every month since March of 2020. Every month without exception. My pension comes in on the 1st, I said. $1,140. That is the only deposit I receive, every single month for 5 years. I have every bank statement." Victoria's phone screen went dark. She set it on the table very carefully. "Robert, sweetheart, the account isn't structured as a direct deposit. It's a trust vehicle. You don't see it in your personal checking because it accumulates separately for major medical expenses. When you need a significant procedure, the funds are there." "What is the account number?" Daniel said. His voice had changed. I had not heard him use that voice before, but I recognized it, the voice of a man who is performing calm because the alternative is something he cannot afford right now. "Daniel, I can't access those details from memory. I'd need to check my files when we're home." "You set it up. You manage it professionally. You're telling me you don't remember the account number for a trust that receives $10,000 a month. I manage dozens of accounts. I can't be expected to memorize every number." I stood up slowly, the way I've learned to stand since the Parkinsons arrived, deliberate and careful. I walked to the second bedroom, the one I now use as an office, and I came back with a manila accordion folder I've kept since retirement. 31 years of auditing trains you to keep documentation for everything. I opened it on the table and began laying out bank statements, one by one, 60 months of them, each one showing the same deposits: pension, food bank reimbursement, nothing else. "I haven't received $1, I said again, quiet and precise. "Not one." Daniel pulled out his phone. His hands were not entirely steady either, but for different reasons than mine. He pulled up his banking application and turned the screen toward his wife. I could see the transfer history from where I sat. 60 entries. $10,000 each, everyone labeled Robert Harmon Medical Trust. "The money left my account every month," Daniel said. "Where did it go, Victoria?" She picked up her cashmere coat. She put it back down. She touched her bracelet, a gold thing with small diamonds, and I filed that gesture away the way I file all tells. "I need to make a call," she said. This is clearly a misunderstanding about account structures, and I want to get someone on the phone who can explain it properly. Sit down, Daniel said. She sat. What happened next took about 40 minutes. It had the quality of watching a structure that appears solid begin to fail, each supporting element giving way in sequence. First, she claimed the account was accumulating. Then she claimed the disbursements went to my medical providers directly. When Daniel pointed out that I had documentation showing I owed my neurologist $4,200 and had been on a payment plan for 18 months, the direct payment story collapsed. Then she said the account had experienced losses due to market conditions. Daniel asked for the investment documentation. She said her financial advisor handled that and she'd need to contact him. Daniel asked for the advisor's name. She gave one. Daniel searched the name on his phone and found no record of a licensed financial professional by that name in Washington state. By the end, she was not talking. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the table, and the bracelet sat perfectly still on her wrist, no longer being touched. I cleared the dinner plates while Daniel made calls in the kitchen doorway. I wrapped the leftover lamb carefully in foil, the way Carol always did. I heard Daniel say, very quietly, to someone on the phone, I need you to look at everything, every account she has access to. Tonight, if possible. They left for a hotel that evening. Daniel embraced me at the door, both arms long and tight. The kind of embrace you give when you realize you should have given it much sooner. I'm going to fix this, Dad, he said. I promise you. I told him to get some sleep first, that promises keep better after rest. I locked the door, leaned against it, and stood in the quiet of my house for a long moment. Then I went to my office, sat at my desk, and began doing what I had spent 31 years being trained to do. I opened my laptop. I pulled out a fresh legal pad, the yellow kind I've used since my first audit job in 1991. At the top, I wrote, December 23rd. Below that, I wrote, $10,000 times 60 months equals $600,000. Then I wrote, where did it go? I started with what I knew. Daniel's transfers were documented and real. The receiving account existed somewhere under my name, but without my knowledge or access. Victoria, a former licensed financial advisor, had established and managed it. The transfers had been ongoing for 5 years with 0 disbursements reaching me. In the fraud detection world, this is not complicated. It is brazen. The kind of scheme that works not because it's sophisticated, but because it relies on trust, the trust of a son for his wife, and the trust of an old man for the people who claim to be helping him. By midnight, I had a preliminary timeline covering 3 pages of the legal pad. By 2 in the morning, I had drafted a list of documentation I would need. By 3, I made myself stop, take my evening medication, and sleep for 5 hours, because exhaustion impairs judgment, and I needed to be sharp. Daniel came back at 9 the following morning. He sat at my kitchen table while I made coffee, and he told me what his financial advisor friend in Seattle had found after spending most of the night reviewing the account structures linked to Daniel's business and personal finances. The Robert Harmon Medical Trust existed. It had been opened in Delaware deliberately for the light regulatory oversight, with Victoria listed as sole trustee and manager. My name appeared as the trust's namesake. I had no legal access and had never been notified the account existed, which was not technically illegal in Delaware trust law, but was a choice that made the intent unmistakable. The trust had received exactly $600,000 over 5 years. Current balance, $11,240. The remaining $588,760 was gone. I wrote the number on the legal pad, drew a line under it, and said, all right, let's find it. We spent Christmas Eve at my dining room table instead of celebrating. Daniel had his laptop, I had my legal pad, and together we began reconstructing 5 years of trust account activity, using the records Daniel's advisor had requested through legal authority as co-owner of the marital finances. The spending pattern appeared within the first hour. It had the same structure as every embezzlement case I had ever audited. Large irregular withdrawals to personal accounts, clustered purchases designed to stay below reporting thresholds, luxury goods purchased through boutiques rather than department stores to reduce paper trails. Victoria had been thorough but not creative. Embezzlers rarely are. They assume the people around them aren't paying attention. They are usually right until they are catastrophically wrong. The purchases: $68,000 at luxury boutiques in Bellevue and Seattle, a $94,000 BMW leased in Victoria's name, paid from trust funds, a $55,000 investment in a friend's restaurant that failed in 2022, $112,000 in spa treatments, personal travel, and entertainment, documented through credit card statements that Victoria had charged to a card linked to the trust, a $140,000 down payment on a condominium in Scottsdale, Arizona, titled in Victoria's name only, funded through a series of transfers structured to avoid bank scrutiny thresholds. I circled the Scottsdale entry in red. She bought real estate, I said. Daniel stared at the entry. She told me that condo was an investment she made with her pre-marriage savings. When did you get married? October 2022. The down payment transferred in November 2022. I turned the laptop screen toward him. 1 month after your wedding. He sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up and walked to the kitchen window and stood there with his back to me for about 2 minutes. He let him stand. Grief needs its moment before strategy can begin, and what he was feeling was grief, the particular kind that comes from realizing the person you trusted most decided, at some specific point in time, to become your enemy. He came back to the table. What do? We document everything we found. Then we find an attorney tomorrow. Then we file. I had spent Christmas Eve preparing a second thing in parallel to the financial investigation. 31 years in insurance auditing means I know attorneys. I don't know Portland family law attorneys personally, but I know how to evaluate one. I had spent the afternoon hours while Daniel made phone calls researching the 3 highest-rated fraud and family law attorneys in Portland and Seattle. I prepared a summary document. 2 pages, bullet points, key figures, evidence status, anticipated legal theories, the kind of briefing that turns a $400 an hour consultation into a productive 45 minutes. December 26th, we sat across from Catherine Osei in her downtown Portland office. She was 52, board-certified in family law and financial fraud, with a resume that included recovering assets in 3 high-profile fraud cases. She read my summary document without speaking for 4 minutes. Then she looked up. You built this yourself? 31 years auditing insurance claims and financial statements. I know what a paper trail looks like, and I know how to follow one. This is more organized than most discovery packages I receive from opposing counsel. She set it down. Tell me about the trust structure. We laid out everything. When we finished, she leaned back and said, The Delaware trust structure is the key. Victoria established a vehicle in your name for the specific purpose of receiving funds from your son, then designated herself the sole manager with disbursement authority. That's not a family fund. That's a financial instrument designed to intercept money. The legal theory here is unjust enrichment and constructive fraud. Civil, not criminal, your son sent the money voluntarily, so the theft argument is more complicated criminally. But civilly, we can demonstrate the money was designated for your benefit, was never used for your benefit, and was converted to her personal use. We can also pursue the Scottsdale condo under fraudulent transfer statutes. What's the realistic recovery? Daniel asked. The BMW is leased, so there's nothing to recover there beyond lease payments. The restaurant investment is gone. But the Scottsdale condo has equity. The account still has $11,000, and with the purchase receipts on the luxury goods, we may be able to trace some inventory. My estimate. Recovery of $400,000 to $450,000 if we move aggressively, and she doesn't declare bankruptcy to complicate things. File everything, Daniel said. Whatever it takes. I wrote a retainer check. My hand was steady. We spent the following week in careful preparation, the kind that determines whether a case succeeds or becomes a long, expensive stalemate. Daniel flew back to Seattle to meet with his own divorce attorney. He had made that decision on Christmas Eve, quietly, without drama, the way he makes most important decisions. He filed for divorce on December 28th. Victoria received the papers on December 30th. Her response was immediate and revealing. She called Daniel 17 times in 2 hours. When he didn't answer, she called me. I answered once, out of curiosity about what she would say. Robert, Her voice was controlled, but the control was the thin kind, like ice over water that is not yet frozen. I want you to understand that what you're doing to this family is irreversible. Daniel will never forgive himself for choosing a paranoid old man's accusations over his wife, and I will make sure he regrets this for the rest of his life. Victoria, I said, I spent 31 years reviewing false narratives in insurance fraud cases. I want you to know that nothing you've just said contains a single denial of what you did. You threatened consequences. You did not say you didn't take the money. That distinction will matter in court. I wished her a happy new year and hung up. Catherine had advised me to document any contact attempts. I had already set up a separate folder on my phone, labeled V calls. I logged the time, duration, and content of each one. 3 days later, a letter arrived from a Seattle attorney, a man named Garrison Walsh, whose firm specialized in representing wealthy clients in family disputes. The letter informed me that Victoria intended to countersue for defamation and emotional distress, seeking $175,000 in damages, and that I should be aware that my cognitive decline, their phrase, rendered my financial recollections unreliable and potentially delusional. I read the letter twice. Then I called my neurologist's office and scheduled a cognitive assessment. 2 weeks later, I sat in Dr. Patricia Moore's office at OHSU while she walked me through 2 hours of memory assessments, pattern recognition tasks, executive function evaluations, and logical reasoning tests. When she finished, she folded her hands and said, "Mr. Harmon, your cognitive scores are in the 88th percentile for your age group, and frankly competitive for any age group. Your executive function and working memory are exceptionally strong. Your Parkinson's diagnosis has not produced any cognitive deterioration that I can measure. Can I get that in writing? I'll have a certified report to your attorney within the week." I thanked her, collected my coat, and took the bus home. On the ride, I watched the January rain on the windows and thought about Victoria's attorney's choice to use the word delusional. It was the tell. When a defense strategy leads with attacking the plaintiff's mental competence, rather than disputing the evidence, it means the evidence is not disputable. They knew the paper trail was real. Their only move was to discredit the man who followed it. Catherine filed the civil suit on January 15th. The claims: unjust enrichment, constructive trust, conversion of designated funds, fraudulent transfer of the Scottsdale property. Total demand: $600,000, principal plus interest plus legal fees plus punitive damages. We also filed a formal report with the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions, noting that Victoria had used her former financial advisory credentials in establishing the trust, which potentially implicated her professional licensing history. The same week, Catherine arranged for a forensic accountant named David Reyes to conduct a full financial autopsy of the trust account and all connected accounts he could access through the divorce discovery process. Reyes was 55, methodical, the kind of man who finds incorrect numbers personally offensive. He called me after 3 days to discuss my preliminary analysis. "Mr. Harmon, your reconstruction was accurate to within $2,000, he said. "I've been doing this for 22 years. I don't often say this to non-professionals, but your work is better organized than most." "I had 31 years of practice," I said. His final report ran 51 pages. It confirmed $588,760 in misappropriated funds, categorized every expenditure, identified the beneficial ownership structure of the Scottsdale condo, and included a timeline showing that Victoria had begun making personal withdrawals from the trust within 30 days of its establishment, before the structure had even been fully set up, which demonstrated premeditation rather than opportunism. She hadn't drifted into theft. She had planned it from the beginning. Victoria's attorney filed the countercomplaint in February. It was everything Catherine had predicted: defamation, emotional distress, and an affidavit from Victoria's sister claiming I had shown signs of paranoia and memory problems at family gatherings. The affidavit was specific enough that I could tell someone had helped draft it, probably Walsh himself. Catherine read the countercomplaint with professional calm. Standard playbook for wealthy defendants in fraud cases. Attack the accuser's credibility. The cognitive assessment report destroys their primary theory. The sister's affidavit is easy to challenge. She has financial ties to Victoria through a shared investment in the failed restaurant, which gives her clear motive to protect her sister. How do we proceed? We depose Victoria next month, and I want you to prepare a written chronology of every interaction you had with her over the past 4 years in which she made representations about the trust account. Every phone call, every dinner conversation, every email if you saved them. I had saved them, not because I suspected fraud at the time, but because I had spent a career in documentation, and the habit is permanent. I retrieved 4 years of emails from my archived folders. Among them, sent in August of 2021, was an email from Victoria to me, copying Daniel, that read, "Robert, just confirming the trust is fully operational and accumulating well. Your medical security is in great hands." I had responded, "Thank you, Victoria. That's reassuring." The email chain was time-stamped, archived, and completely authentic. I forwarded it to Catherine with a note. She confirmed it in writing. Catherine's response came back within the hour. "This is what we needed." March brought the deposition. Victoria arrived with Walsh, and a woman whose job was evidently to hand Walsh documents at specific moments. Victoria was composed, dressed in quiet, expensive clothing. The cashmere coat was absent, replaced by something that suggested restraint. She had prepared carefully. She held her prepared narrative together for about an hour. The trust was a legitimate family financial vehicle. She had managed it responsibly. Any delays in disbursement were due to her conservative investment philosophy and desire to protect the principal for major future medical needs. The spending she authorized from the account was related to administrative costs and trust management. Catherine let her finish. Then she placed a printed copy of the 2021 email on the table. "You wrote to my client that the trust was, quote, fully operational and accumulating well. Can you identify what the trust had accumulated by that date?" Victoria looked at the email. The investment portfolio was growing. What was the portfolio's value on that date? I would need to check the records. Our forensic accountant has the records. On that date, the trust had received $180,000 and had a remaining balance of $22,400. The rest had been withdrawn to accounts in your name. When you wrote that the trust was accumulating well, you were aware of that balance? A pause. The trust was structured for long-term accumulation. The account had lost 88% of its deposits within 18 months of establishment. In your professional experience as a licensed financial advisor, does that represent accumulation? The deposition lasted 4 hours. By the end, Victoria had contradicted herself on the account's purpose 3 times, on the disbursement structure twice, and had been unable to explain, in any coherent way, why $140,000 in trust funds had been used to purchase a condominium in her name alone. Walsh called 3 recesses. When we broke for lunch, Catherine and I sat in a conference room and she said, simply, "She's done." In April, while the civil case moved toward a hearing date, Daniel discovered something that Catherine described as the document we didn't know we needed, but would have spent months finding. He had been going through the shared office files in the Seattle house as part of the divorce asset documentation, and in a locked drawer the key was on the same ring as Victoria's car keys, which she had left when she moved out. He found a folder. Inside was a draft document transferring a property interest in my Portland house to Victoria's mother, contingent on Victoria's signature as my authorized representative. The document was dated 4 months after our last conversation about the trust. There was a sticky note in Victoria's handwriting, "Robert resistant. Try again after Christmas." She had been planning to take my house. I had never signed anything. I never would have. But the intention was there, documented, in her own handwriting, with a timeline that suggested she had been probing the possibility for over a year. Catherine filed the document as supplemental evidence. "This establishes a pattern," she said. "The trust was not an isolated financial decision. It was one element of a longer scheme to extract everything of value from your family. Courts respond to patterns." The preliminary hearing in May went exactly as Catherine predicted. Judge Lawrence Tran, presiding, reviewed the forensic report, the deposition transcript, the email evidence, and the draft property transfer document. Victoria's attorney argued the trust had been misunderstood, that the spending reflected legitimate management decisions, that the property document was a preliminary estate planning draft that was never executed. Judge Tran was not persuaded. His preliminary findings cited overwhelming documentary evidence of intentional misappropriation and noted that the defendant's testimony had been contradicted by her own written communications at multiple points. Walsh filed a motion requesting settlement discussions. Catherine called me with her voice carrying the particular warmth of professional satisfaction. They want to settle. Walsh reached out this morning. What are they offering? They haven't made a number yet, but they're asking, which means they know what's coming if this goes to full trial. Tell them we want full recovery of principal, 5% annual interest compounded, legal fees, and the Scottsdale condo, or its current equity value. Catherine was quiet for a moment. That's a hard number. The forensic report is 51 pages. The deposition transcript is 230 pages. We have her emails, we have her handwriting on the property document, and we have a cognitive assessment that puts her mental competence argument in the ground. Tell them that's our number. The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks. Victoria liquidated the Scottsdale condo at a loss in a forced sale, and the equity came to $118,000. The seized personal accounts held $67,000. Victoria's attorney negotiated the remaining amount through a structured payment plan guaranteed by Daniel's divorce attorneys as part of the marital asset division. Daniel agreed to accept a smaller share of the joint marital assets in exchange for Victoria's fraud liability being counted against her portion. When everything was totaled and Catherine's contingency fee was subtracted, the net recovery was $391,000. Not quite the full $600,000, that was the honest number. Walsh had been stubborn about the restaurant investment money genuinely gone, and the BMW lease payments could not be recovered through the settlement. But $391,000 returned from $600,000 stolen, recovered through documentation and patience, and refusing to let a well-dressed woman's confident narrative stand unchallenged. Catherine called with the final accounting on a Thursday afternoon in late June. I was sitting on my back porch watching the neighbors' roses, which had come back well this year after a difficult winter. Judgment satisfied. Wire transfer confirmed. Funds are in the client escrow account. I'll send the distribution to you today. Thank you, Catherine, for everything. Thank your 31 years of auditing, Mr. Harmon. You handed me a case that was already built. I just carried it into the courtroom. 2 things happened in the same week the settlement finalized. The first was that Daniel called to tell me the custody evaluation had concluded. He and Victoria had a daughter, Lily, who was 4 years old and had spent the spring being shuttled between her parents' attorneys like a document in discovery. The evaluator's report found that Victoria had engaged in deliberate coaching of Lily's responses during the evaluation sessions, had restricted Daniel's scheduled visitation on 4 occasions without court authorization, and had made statements to the child characterizing her father as untrustworthy. The judge granted Daniel primary custody. Victoria received supervised visitation pending a reassessment in 6 months. Daniel called me immediately after receiving the ruling. He said, "Dad," and then stopped, and I could hear him working through something on the other end of the line. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't called you on Christmas morning. If I'd just asked if you needed more money, and you'd said you were fine. You did call, I said. That's what matters. I should have called sooner. Daniel. I used the same voice I used with his mother when she went down the path of cataloging her own failures. You trusted your wife. Every person who has ever been defrauded by someone close to them trusted that person. It is not a character defect. It is what trust is. When you learned the truth, you did not hesitate. You did not ask me to quietly let it go to protect your marriage. You stood beside me through every step of a 6-month legal process. That is who you are, and it is exactly who I raised you to be. I am proud of you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Mom would have called Victoria something very specific that she never said in front of company. I laughed. He was right. Carol had opinions and the vocabulary to express them precisely. She would have. And then she would have made the lamb roast and fed everyone at the table and said, "All right, let's figure out what to do next." I miss Hia. I do too. Every day. But she knew you'd be all right. She said so. The last week, in the hospital, she said, "Daniel's going to be fine, Robert. He has your stubbornness and my common sense." She was right. The second thing that happened that week was that Lily came to Portland for the first long visit. Daniel drove down with her on a Friday afternoon, and she came through my front door, already telling me about a book she'd been reading about butterflies, holding it up as evidence, 3 chapters in, and deeply invested in the metamorphosis process. I made dinner. She helped me set the table, arranging the silverware with great seriousness and some creative interpretation. She asked me why my hands shook, and I told her about the Parkinson's in simple terms, and she considered this carefully and then said, "Does it hurt?" And I said, "No. It mostly just makes things take a little longer." She said, "Okay," and went back to her silverware arrangement, satisfied. Children are direct and efficient in a way adults rarely manage. After dinner, we sat on the back porch in the warm July evening while Daniel washed the dishes, and Lily asked me questions about the roses, about what a chief auditor does, about whether I had ever found anyone doing something wrong at work. I told her yes, occasionally. She asked what happened to them. I said that when you document things carefully and follow the evidence properly, the right outcome usually happens, though it takes time and patience. She considered this. "My teacher says patience is hard," she said. "Your teacher is correct," I said. "It is the hardest part." She fell asleep on the drive to the hotel, and Daniel texted me from the parking garage. She asked if she could call you Grandpa Robert. I hope that's okay. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, with the evening settling around the house that I have owned since 1994, that Carol and I painted ourselves the summer Daniel turned 11, where I have lived through the best and worst things that have happened to me. And I typed back, "Tell her it is more than okay. Tell her I've been waiting for that." In August, I met with an estate planning attorney and a financial advisor, one I selected myself, with references I verified, and we built a structure that will be very difficult for anyone to tamper with. My house passes directly to Daniel upon my death through a properly established trust, with Lily named as secondary beneficiary. The $391,000 net recovery was divided as follows: $40,000 set aside for my own medical expenses, and a proper emergency fund, managed through a straightforward account at my local credit union, no trustee required. The remaining $351,000 went into an education trust for Lily, managed by Daniel as trustee, with distribution at ages 18, 22, and 25 for educational and life establishment purposes. Carol had set aside money for Daniel's college, carefully, over many years, in a process that required real sacrifice. This felt like the right continuation of something she had started. Victoria lives in a studio apartment in Tacoma now. She lost her professional licensing in Washington after the Department of Financial Institutions completed their review. The fraud judgment follows her credit report. The charity boards she sat on, funded by stolen money, requested her resignations. Daniel told me she has changed her phone number twice. I do not think about her often, and when I do, it is with the particular detachment of a man who has closed a case file and moved on to the next thing. The next thing, for me, turned out to be quieter than I expected and better than I had any particular right to hope for. I sit on my back porch on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, when the weather permits. The tremors are stable. The medication is covered through the prescription assistance program I'm still enrolled in, not because I need the help financially now, but because I qualified, and the application was already approved, and I see no reason to create unnecessary administrative work for anyone. The lawn is cut. The roses came back. Daniel calls every Sunday, and Lily often takes the phone partway through to report on the butterflies. I keep a legal pad on my desk. Old habit. Right now, the top sheet has notes from a conversation with Catherine about a neighbor who asked me informally to look at some financial documents that seemed off to him. I told him I am not an attorney and cannot give legal advice, but I can look at documents. 31 years of practice does not expire just because the paycheck stopped. There is a photograph Daniel took on the porch the last weekend he visited, him and Lily and me in the afternoon light. Lily is holding up the butterfly book, triumphant, because she finished it. Daniel has his arm around my shoulder. I am looking at the camera with the expression, I am told, of someone who has just set down something heavy after carrying it for a very long time. That description is accurate. The weight is down. The case is closed. The family is intact. And the porch, in the late summer light, feels like exactly enough. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Frost Vengeance. Leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and click the video on your left to hear what happened next.